So, where should I start? Perhaps my motivation for being a monk. As a child, I used to have experiences of deep silence when I woke up. Every couple of years, kind of thing. And that deep silence was something that was, I call it my real home. And it wasn't something that anyone talked about or that I could talk about. So it was a very personal and unexplained experience, and then it would disappear. And it was always in the back of my consciousness that this is important, even as a child, but I couldn't formulate that in any kind of mature, concrete way. And then I do what a kid does or what an adolescent does and so on, and that wouldn't work, and so what works, and then I'd wake up one morning again and that same sense of deep silence and compassion would be there again, and there it is. But then it would be gone again, and it wasn't the kind of experience that really had memory in it. It was something other. So I went to U of T, but I was a terrible student. Terrible student. Because that same sense of longing was there, and as soon as I got to university, I realized, no, this isn't it either, but what is it? So it was a very kind of despairing state of affairs, because I knew there was something, but I had really no idea, and nothing in my culture was speaking to me about that. This was, I went to U of T, when did I go? Or mid-60s, I suppose. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in the 60s. So then I dropped out of university, and then I traveled across, and I made my way to India. And in India I lived a year and a half, and the same kind of longing was there, again not knowing what to do. And then I read Krishnamurti, and by reading Krishnamurti, my mind came to that same state once again, but now I was fully conscious. Now I was, I really understood what this was about. That lasted about a day. Next day it was gone. And if you're a meditator, I think you know what I mean. And then I read Krishnamurti, but you can't do it that way. And so, but now I knew, this is, I have to follow this now. And I kind of understood where the longing was pointing to. And very fortunately, about a month later, I was living up in the Khamon Hills near the Nepalese border, up about 5,000 feet. There were a few Westerners around. I was quite a loner. And I had a little kind of stone shack. I was living on like $10 a month or something, kind of very thin, very basic kind of life, but a good life. And then about a month after that experience, I met a Buddhist monk. His name was Venerable Jnanasuchi, who was from Detroit, and he had ordained in Sri Lanka, had been a bhikkhu for 5 years. And he was on his way to Thailand, and I invited him to stay with me a while, and he's the one that inspired me to Theravada Buddhism. And what he spoke about was very much a path where I could connect intellectually to what he was talking about, and it spoke to what I was experiencing. It spoke to the path of awareness and the path of awakening. And then one day, he spoke about the monastic life, and I saw stars. I thought, there's a lifestyle, you can do this? And I don't know where that comes from, because culturally, the idea of me being a monk was bizarre. My poor parents. They really thought I'd lost the plot. It took a long time to persuade them that I wasn't completely batty. But anyway, that there was something in me, had the karma, whatever, to pursue this life. And it was so strong. When I think back about it, I'm always surprised. The strength of conviction and faith that arose from that meeting with Venerable Jnanasuchi. Well, we decided that we would go to Thailand together. He said there were good meditation teachers in Thailand. And he was going to go to Nepal first. We were going to meet in Calcutta. This would have been 72. And he went off to Nepal and sends me a postcard saying he had disrobed. That was not nice. Kind of, what? You can disrobe? I really didn't know anything. He was the only monk I'd ever met. And so then, I chickened out. I stayed in India. I got hepatitis. I got quite weak. And I stayed on for almost a year, and about half a year more. And then I finally made my way back to Europe. And I was working in Switzerland, trying to get some money together, get my health together. And what was really interesting about this was that I had now lost this deep, deep yearning for this life. I lost the memory of that insight. And that to me is very, there was like so powerful and so strong and so real. It wasn't just a young man's fantasy. It was very, very real. I lost it. And so I was working construction and making pretty good money. And then I earned enough money to travel again. But my mind had again entered into this state of longing, but not really knowing what I was longing for. And so then I was quite young, and I had this mad idea. Well, I'll go up to Hamburg, and I'll find a boat, and I'll work my way to South America. It's a wacky idea. So I went up to Hamburg, and I started to walk along the docks looking for it. And it was very depressing. It wasn't a very moral kind of place, and didn't know what to do. Then I walked into the student. I looked for Hamburg University. I walked to the university, and I went to the student travel bureau, and I said to the lady at the counter, "Can you give me a list of flights?" And she said, "Where to?" I said, "I don't care. Wherever. Just give me a list of flights." So she gave me a list of flights, and I scanned my finger down, and I found Bangkok. And I said, "That's what I'm supposed to do." And I remembered again. I remember what I was supposed to be doing. To me, that, I still think about that, the sort of strangeness of it. Within 2 weeks, I was in Bangkok. Within a month, I was a Samanera. I ordained in Bangkok. And within 2 months of that, I had met Ajahn Chah. And what's that about? What's that about? Well, for me, I just had really good parami, or good fortune, or good karma, something. And then when I met Ajahn Chah, before that, I didn't really like the methodology that I was being taught. I was being taught a very kind of regimented way of practice that came from Burma that really didn't fit my character. And it wasn't really a lifestyle. And what I saw, I think early on, is that meditation technique, you can't live your life in a meditation technique. You can't live your life eating slowly. It'd be awful, counting the number of bites you've had or something like that. And I realized that really I wanted a lifestyle. I wanted a lifestyle. I didn't want some kind of technique. And when I went up, my teacher took me up to see Ajahn Chah. It was very quiet, very peaceful, and obviously I was impressed with him. And I asked if I could stay. And the translator translated Lompo Cha, and he said, Lompo Cha says, "There's not very much food here." I said, "Oh, I only eat a little bit." But what he had actually said was, "The food's not very good," which proved to be very true. It was very rough. But I was impressed with the place. I went back to Bangkok and got myself sorted out and began to live with Ajahn Chah. And he is exceptional man, exceptional being. Just being around him, I could plug into the silence of his mind and the compassion of his heart. So that good fortune of meeting someone who is profoundly realized and who has both, he had both the insight into the liberation of the heart, from what I could tell, but also he understood the social conventions of Buddhist monasticism and the social conventions of being a monk in a Buddhist society. He had both that worldly sense in a very practical way and the kind of transcendent understanding. So he was very special that way. And his monasteries was a place that offered a kind of a training that fit my character very, very well, and wasn't really so dependent on him. You know, it was something he understood how monastic life could be, where we could plug into this and just learn by being in that monastic life. And so I found it very difficult because prior to that I'd been traveling by about 3 years, doing my own thing. So if I got bored, I just went to another country, or had yogurt, you know, whatever. And now, all of a sudden, I was in a container which I respected greatly, in a society which gave me a lot of moral support. A society which was very, very poor, but not impoverished, just very simple, very simple. And with men, we were, I think, maybe 5 Westerners. Ajahn Sumedho was on. I don't know if Ajahn Sumedho was the senior Western disciple of Ajahn Chah, and he was on pilgrimage in India at the time, so I hadn't met him. But so the situation for me was, although I respected it, I respected Ajahn Chah, it was very, very, very austere for me, very austere. No distractions. I didn't speak Thai. The food was very poor. And it was very hot, and there was actually nothing to do. Nothing to do, really. I mean, the days are long, long days. And I began to just kind of figure out how, what the language is about, and so on. I suffered a lot from kind of adjusting to the food. I think I was green for about 2 years. My complexion was very, some old pictures are very thin. But Ajahn Chah, his skill was that, okay, you're here now, you've given yourself to this now what's the cause of suffering? And he'd always emphasize the Four Noble Truths. And that took me, it took me a long time just to adapt physically, but it took me some time to begin to use that model of understanding the mind, because it was very easy for me to say, well, I'm suffering because the food's not good, I'm suffering because it's too hot, I'm suffering because you talk too much, I'm suffering because, like the monks around me, they're all from farming families. They're really strong men. Physically strong, but also they had a lot of endurance. Kind of could sit on concrete floors for hours and hours and hours, could bear the heat, could bear the mosquitoes, could bear the malaria. I was a city boy. I liked my croissants. I liked my coffee. I liked to read a newspaper. I liked soft beds. No way, Jose, this is not going to be there. And so I was faced with a very physical challenge, and that developed in me a lot of character. Just the very capacity to be able to endure discomfort and heat and all those things that I was going through. And I didn't realize at the time how important that is in the spiritual life. And I would go to Ajahn Chah and say, oh, my practice is down the tube, I can't meditate, I'm restless, and I fall asleep, and da-da-da-da-da. And he said, yeah, what did you expect? You haven't developed the mind. Thanks a lot, right? Thanks for the encouragement. He said, no, you have to develop some parami. Parami is like virtuous qualities. You have to develop endurance. You have to be able to endure heat and pain and discomfort. But it was never torturous. It wasn't like he was torturing me. It's just the environment was much, much rougher than I was used to. And at the time, I just had a lot of faith in what he was saying, and I guess I had the willfulness to hang in there. And I could see, and as I cast back now, because I've been at this for a few decades, I can see how important those years were. Very formative years of containment, no distraction. Life now in the West is much more distracting for us. I've got an iPad and I do emails and da-da-da-da, like everyone else, and we kind of need it for this society. But there was no literature. I had a dictionary that got eaten by the termites. That was really depressing. It was a lovely dictionary. When you leave for 2 weeks and you come back, oh no, they've eaten it. That's not fair. So I feel sorry for myself, and I get sick, and I think of my mom and grapes. But all the time, Ajahn Chah said, no, well, what's the cause of suffering? Where is the suffering? I said, well, it's this place, it's so bloody hot. That's where the cause of suffering is. No, look at your mind. And slowly I wasn't a rebellious person, and I was quite determined. And I'd kind of think, well, what's this got to do with that experience of peacefulness and centeredness that I was longing for? Where is that at? And he just began to explain to me, well, you're really attached to the sense realm. You can touch that every now and then, but very rarely, because you're very attached to comfort, to all these different things. Your mind needs a certain level of certain kinds of conditions to be happy and peaceful. And so I began to say, yeah, he's right. I haven't, and I began to just like with the food. One of the monasteries I was at, we'd have. I remember being so hungry, I'd have cake dreams. I'd be in this big grocery store. I mean, this was 40 years ago, right? I'm a bit better now. But I'd have this cake dream, and I'd have a shopping cart, and it would be piled with cakes. And I'd get to the checkout counter, I wouldn't have any money. I'm a monk. No. So the craving was serious. It was very serious. And what happened was that because there was really nowhere to go except my own mind, there was no refuge anywhere, really. Culturally, I really couldn't converse with the monks. My real refuge, in terms of humanity, was just sitting near Ajahn Chah. When he would sit under his kuti, and it would be like satsang, just being with the teacher, and just being with him emptied my mind. And I'd come to that state of kind of purity every now and then by just being with him. And then, of course, he'd send me away to another monastery. And I'd say, oh, come on. But all the time, the teaching was all the time, well, why do you suffer? It's because of attachment to some kind of experience, attachment to craving. And slowly, I began to see, oh yeah, it's not the heat, it's not the discomfort, it's not Ajahn Chah speaking for hours and hours and hours. It's my wanting things to be other than they are. And that constant reflection became actually a very simple kind of practice to observe. Very simple, but I was pretty deeply rooted in my own comforts, very much so. But those lessons, like developing spiritual qualities or character, which can bear with the way things are, not in a way of self-mortification, not in a way where I was hurting myself, because it was never that. People were always kind. It was just tough for a soft city guy. So that lesson of, well, if I'm going to develop a spiritual life, I've got to put in the work. I've got to put in time. I've got to develop character that can be with the way things are, rather than just get what I want. And then just the model of the Four Noble Truths, that there's suffering, there's a cause of suffering, there's the end of suffering, there's a path. And the cause of suffering is attachment to craving, and that the end of suffering is the abandonment craving. And that took a long time to figure out. It's easy in the words. I'm sure I could get an A in high school Buddhism. What is Buddhism? Four Noble Truths. But actually realizing craving and what that is. Because I had a desire to be enlightened. I had a desire to return to that purity, which was a good desire. I think it's a good desire. So to figure out, well, what is a wholesome desire? And then what are they talking about with craving? What do they mean about that? And so some teachers would say to them, well, there's smart desire and there's stupid desire. There's wholesome desire, there's unwholesome desire. And I just began to contemplate that. And even though the words were there, it took me a long time to see what they meant by that. And Ajahn Sumedho then became very instrumental in helping me. And I would early on, I'd have a lot of anger. Again, this is quite a long time ago, but I'd be, just feeling frustrated and not getting anywhere in my practice and just fed up with the whole thing. And I'd go to Ajahn Sumedho and I'd feel guilty for being angry. Buddhists, monks are supposed to be very compassionate kind of chaps. But actually I wasn't very compassionate, I was just ticked off at everyone. And then I didn't see that the problem wasn't the anger. I didn't see that the problem was my not wanting the anger. The problem was the craving. And that's the first time I think I began to see it's not the arising of the emotion or the conscious form that was coming into play. It was my desire not to have that or to have something else. And that took some understanding. And Ajahn said, well, don't worry about it, you're just angry. Huh? What do you mean? Shouldn't I worry about it? Yeah, well, he said, don't punch anyone. You don't hurt anyone, but just walk up and down and swear for a while. What do you mean swear? Just swear, don't worry about it. I was very compassionate, because I was so caught up in my ideal of a good Buddhist monk, always being kind and generous and dutiful and da-da-da-da. But my mind was just roaring with anger and frustration. He said, no, you gotta make that conscious first. And so Luang Por Sumedho, in the early days, he taught a lot this idea of consciousness as the escape hatch. When you feel something and you allow it to become conscious and don't grasp it as a personal thing, don't attach to it with craving, let it become conscious, then it's a kind of purification. He'd also use this horrible image of that when you do that, then it's like an emotional enema. Terrible, terrible image. But it really was for me. I mean, I was doing some cleansing because I had never really worked with the mind. If I felt angry, I got angry. If I felt fearful, I ran away or whatever. Now I'm trapped. But trapped in a good way. Now, and I began to see I don't have the freedom to do what I want to do unless I disrobe, which I could do any time. I don't have the freedom just to do what I want, eat what I want, go where I want, but I have the freedom to watch. And that was an important insight into monasticism. The monasticism gave me the requisites. People were very, very generous, very, very kind. So I have that kind of economic freedom. And then within that, I have the freedom to watch suffering and the end of suffering. And I began to appreciate that the methodology of monasticism and the Four Noble Truths. I'm going to see how that worked. And those early lessons of like developing character, developing parami, and then always using the Four Noble Truths. If you're suffering, you're attached to some kind of craving. And so I began to be able to be conscious of anger and not make it a problem. And not punch my brothers in the face. And begin to see that making things conscious is the escape hatch. So those are the first years, and I was in Thailand for about 4.5 years. And then I went to Canada for the first time. I hadn't been back to Canada for about 7 years. And I went with a fellow monk, an American, Ajahn Anando from Buffalo. So we visited his family in Buffalo and my family in Toronto. And the plan was that we would be there, and at the same time Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Sumedho and another bhikkhu, Venerable, Viradhammo, were in London checking out the Hampstead Vihara. And we were going to all meet together at the end of June and then head back to Thailand for the Rains Retreat. And I got this letter saying, Luang Por Chah and Ajahn Sumedho invite you to stay in London. And both of us groaned. Because by now, we had loved Thailand. I had finally adapted. I really loved Thailand. So the idea of, oh no, not London. Cold and wet. And no, my teacher said, okay, all right. So we ended up in the Hampstead Vihara, which was a narrow kind of Edwardian building on a very busy street near Camden Town, on a street called Haverstock Hill in London. And now I felt homesick for Thailand. Now all over again. I want Thailand. And no. What's the cause of suffering? London. That's the cause of suffering. Rain, that's the cause of suffering. No. It's your attachment to craving. And it was interesting, that first year, we walked into some kind of political difficulties with some of the people in the board, and there was a lot of stuff that we didn't know we walked into. There was a pub across the street, and they were very loud and noisy. Sometimes people would come in and just rip the dana box off the wall and walk out with it, and it was not pretty. What's the cause of suffering? It's those drunks across the street. That's the cause of suffering. No. It's your attachment. It's your attachment to craving. Ajahn Chah came and he visited, and a second time, and we had our shrine room was it was a room about from that chair to the wall, and the windows were 11 foot tall, very open to the street. And it was the loudest place. And Ajahn Chah, at the end of the meditation, he said, you think that traffic noise is bothering you. He said, stop going out there and drop bothering that traffic noise. And it was true. He said, that traffic noise is just doing what it does. That's what traffic noise does. And you're going out there and bothering it. Stop doing that. And that was a really good insight, that the problem wasn't the traffic noise, it was my mind. It was my mind wanting silence, wanting stillness, and so on. So Hamsa-Vihara was another kind of situation which I really didn't expect and didn't want. But I had a fabulous teacher now, Ajahn Sumedho, who I could be very, very close to. And then that's where I got closer and closer to him. And he really was so, so helpful, always just kind of pointing to my own attachments. But during that time, we got pretty down. We got sort of, me and Ananda, our practice wasn't very strong. We weren't sitting enough, and we tried to go at an alms round on Haverstock Hill. So we had our alms bowls, and we'd go out in the morning. And once a policeman stopped me, and he says, "What's in the bowl?" I opened the lid. Nothing. You want to give me something? But he didn't. And we just walk out, and what happened was, my mind began to get really kind of depressed with the rain. It was very, very, very rainy, very gray. It was sort of, and people rushing around, and I started to get in a habit of depression, not clinical depression, just a habit of moaning and complaining. And Ajahn Sumedho, he saw, this is not good. So he instituted this incredibly rigorous schedule for us, me, him, and Ananda. And so we got up at 3 a.m, and he said, okay, cold showers first. I said, no. I don't like cold showers. And he's very diligent. He's a very diligent yogi, and so he did it first. Ananda did it second, and I kind of went screaming into the shower third. And, just from, being another day, and pulled a duvet over my head to, come on, put some energy into it, got us going. And then Ajahn Sumedho is a very, very accomplished yogi. He never taught yoga. Put us through an hour's yoga routine, and he'd have us in a headstand for 15 minutes. He could do it, so we had to do it. And you just kept pushing us, but in a good way, not in a brutal way, in a good way. And so those really strong yoga sessions and set us up, and we did a 2-hour sitting in the morning. So by the time we went on alms round, our minds were really strong, very clear. And I remember that, that first morning after doing that, go out on alms round again, and it was raining again. I opened the door, and I opened my umbrella, and I could see my mind now. I could see my mind going to, oh no, I'm in London. The old whining mind. I said, no way. I'm not going to get reborn into that mind state again. I had enough samadhi, I had enough energy, no. And and it wanted to go there because that was its, no. And I put up the umbrella, and I just started to wish all people in London freedom from suffering. It was great. Because they all had to go to work. I didn't have to go to work. They are much more difficult than me. I just would walk. May you be well, may you be well, and it's okay. And then from then on, it was fine. But the mind just didn't have enough wisdom, didn't have centeredness, and just got caught in its negative habits. And I've seen that in my life, where the insight is there, how to do it, but the power of habit, the power of karma, whatever, just grabs you, and you get I get lost again, and then you see it again. So those 2 years in London were interesting, but strengthening once again. And the strength came from the difficulty and the good teaching, the good reminders. So then we sold that, and we got a place in the country called Hurst. We had been, Ajahn Sumedho and Venerable Anando were walking an alms round one morning on Hampstead Heath, which is a beautiful park near where we lived. And we would just walk with our alms bowls, and sometimes people would meet and he'd chat. And this chap came up to Ajahn Sumedho and asked him, "So what are you?" And Ajahn Sumedho, "We're Buddhist monks on alms round." And then Paul started to talk about a forest, 100 acres of land he had in West Sussex. And he started to talk, he said, "Well, I'm into silviculture, I want to develop this land, I want to develop the forest. But I'm only one person, I need some kind of an institution or something that can keep it going in perpetuity." And Ajahn Sumedho said, "Well, I have an organization that could use a forest in perpetuity." And Paul got inspired, and we went back to the Hampstead Vihar, and he eventually donated this land. So we always say, "Oh, we got 100 acres of West Sussex forest in alms round." And it was a sign, obviously it was a sign, okay, things are turning now. Things are turning, something really good. And then the land we couldn't really build on, there was no building on it, and the president of our association, George Sharp, he just started to drive around the area. And this is the heart of the geriatric rich. Prince Charles plays polo near there. So there's just no way we could afford any of the houses there. But he heard that there was a kind of a derelict Victorian house called Chithurst House, and the owner might want to sell. So George went up, and it was this kind of weird, decaying place, built in Victorian times, 14 chimney stacks, and all around it are decaying mini miners, like 50, with brambles growing through them, rotting windows. It was really kind of haunted house kind of place. And the owner was a driving school instructor. But if his car broke down, he just bought another old mini miner. So George goes up to this house, and he knocks on the door. Mr. Hadley comes to the door, and George says, "I heard you might want to sell your house." And Mr. Hadley says, "Yeah? How much?" And they agreed to a price, right there, just like that. Now George had not asked the committee, and you know how committees are. And George, on a handshake, had made an agreement. And then George asked Mr. Hadley, "Can I come in?" Mr. Hadley said, "No, you're buying a derelict house." He didn't let him in. He didn't even let him in. But it was the only place near this 100 acres that we could possibly afford. So George comes back to London and says to the board, "What have you done?" People are, "What? What have you done?" To make a long story short, the price of that house that Mr. Hadley wanted was the selling price of the house in London. And we moved in. And we moved into a derelict house. But now, all of a sudden, we had been in London, and many people were very, very inspired by Ajahn Sumedho, people wanting to ordain. No place to do this. And all of a sudden, I think the Sangha doubled or tripled within 2 years. Because now there was a project, there's a piece of land, Ajahn Sumedho had a forum where he could teach more people, and it really took off. And it was a very inspiring time, very inspiring. I enjoyed the physical work. We had, like the first room I shared with Ajahn Sumedho, and it was a room kind of from here to the wall. It's a biggish room, but half of it had no floor. It was on the second floor. It was full of dry rot, and if I was a sleepwalker, I'd go down 30 feet to the basement. So it's a bit dicey. We had one dripping tap. That was all. It was very derelict. We took out eventually 70% of the wood. Very, very rotten, but it was perfect. It was perfect for what we needed. And we worked hard, and it took 20 years to restore. It's beautiful now. It's exquisite. It's exquisite. But that was the sort of place. So London was a place of just kind of getting to know people, and then Chithurst was the place that the Sangha could really grow. And it really did grow. It grew very, very quickly. And it was interesting, there was all the physical work going on all the time, and no money, how are we going to do this, and hardworking people, and people attracted. And just, I think that being able to be a part of the goodness of something attracted a lot of very good energy, a lot of good energy. And Ajahn Sumedho's teaching was brilliant, and he would keep teaching transcendence. That's what when I think back to those times, it was a very worldly thing in terms of the physical work and the considerations, the plumbing, and how do you do this, and a lot of us didn't. So it was very, very worldly in what we had to do. And every morning at breakfast, many mornings, Ajahn Sumedho would just keep talking about the deathless, Four Noble Truths, attachment to craving, abandon craving. And this combination was so inspiring. It was so very inspiring, because I was a young man, I liked the physical work, I liked the challenge of it, and there was a lot of young guys, and the nuns came and they joined the order, and then we had room for guests, and people were tenting out, and da-da-da-da-da. And all the time, the emphasis is on what we're doing here is the method for transcendence. And that theme has been with me my whole life, that the things we do in Buddhism, the development of compassion, the development of patience, the development of service, all of that is not the goal, it's the method. It's the method, because the transcendent is not an emotional experience. The deathless, nibbana, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unformed, this is not an emotional experience. It's something which underlies all things, which is hidden from us. But the method, living the good life, living a moral life, self-surrender, and so on and so forth, that, he said, that's what we're doing. But the aim is the transcendent. And that was such good teaching. Such very, very good teaching. So, how are we doing? Hope I'm not boring you here. Okay, so then Ajahn Sumedho asked me to go and help start a monastery in Northumberland. And there was a little kind of farm building, and it had no plumbing. And once again, here I go again, plumbing. My karma is to do plumbing. Cold again, no heater, had to do that, da-da-da-da-da. But that was all right. But now I had to start to teach. I'd always just sat near Ajahn Sumedho and listened, and I never really had the responsibilities of being a teacher. And all of a sudden I'm the senior monk. And I was so afraid of teaching. I was really afraid. I was a really shy kid. Like, I was so shy as a kid, if the phone rang, I'd run away. So like teaching was just, you can't do this to me. No way. You can't. No, please don't. No, he says, you go and you teach. And he asked me to teach a retreat. And once again, what's the problem? I'm afraid. I'm nervous. And it brought out all this fear in me. And I knew I was an anxious kind of guy, but I didn't know I was that anxious. And I said, what am I going to teach? And I'm just a young monk, I've only been around 5 years. Come on, give me 10 at least. And he said, well, you probably know more than the rest of them. Thanks a lot. So this was the most powerful thing for me now, where I had to be in front of people and being very afraid. Like panic attacks, running to the toilet 6 times before the talk in 5 minutes, that kind of feeling. Very good for cleansing the system, by the way. And I'd really, I'd be shaking, and what am I going to say? Da-da-da. I tried all kinds of strategies. First, I'd rehearse a talk. And Ajahn Chah said, don't rehearse talks, just go in and speak from the heart. No, I can't do it, I'm too afraid. So I'd rehearse a talk and have, this is going to be great. I go blank. Then what do I do? So then I began, the goal here is not to give a good talk. The goal here is to understand fear. And Ajahn Sumedho said, no, it's not about the talk. Don't worry about the talk. It's the fear. It's the fear that you have to learn from. 10 days? I can't do this for 10. No. Okay, I'll do it. So then I'd watch the fear. Beforehand, I'd see the body, I'd see the proliferation of mind, I'd see the nervousness. Then after giving the talk, I'd feel, I made it. And then someone would compliment me, and then I'd get the ego going, yeah, I'm a great teacher. And then I'd be afraid again, and then I'd be disparaging after the talk, and just the mind running on with ego, with fear, going on and on. I said, will you be quiet up there? What's this got to do with the peace I'm looking for? You know, what's this got? And Lompo would say, well, there's still ego in here. You got to look at this fear. Consciousness is the escape hatch. He'd go back to that again. Consciousness is the escape hatch. So I began to get the insight, and this took a while, that take the Four Noble Truths again. What's the problem? The problem is I have to give this darn retreat. No, that's not the problem. I have to give a talk. That's not the problem. What's the problem? It's just this fear. That's not the problem. But the problem is the not wanting of the fear. That was the problem. And that took a long time to figure out. I do metta practice. Okay, I love everyone. May you be well, may you be well, may you be well. Still afraid. You know, just because I wasn't looking at the fear, right? I was trying to replace the fear with a very wholesome mind state, which was better than just, you know, it's okay, but I wasn't really making conscious the fear. But then when I understood that, I said, I have to make this conscious, then I understood what metta bhavana was about. Then I understood what compassion was about. It wasn't about me and you, it was about acceptance and kindness to the way things are. And in this case, the way things are was fear, panic, really, really uncomfortable stuff. And I began to see, okay, there's the fear and there's the desire not to have the fear. What we call vibhavatana in the Pali. And as I began to see that, I said, oh, if you welcome the fear, then in that awareness, you begin to touch, actually, silence. And that became interesting, that in the midst of fear, I could begin to realize, oh, there's silence behind this fear. And as I made the fear conscious, then the fuel for fear, the attachment to fear, the fear began to fall away. That took a long time, many years of just being afraid, watching fear. And I began to see the value of body meditations. I began to see, if I just go to thought with this fear, I just keep proliferating. If I just stay up in my frontal lobes, it's not working. But if I can feel fear in my throat, if I can feel fear in my heart, oh yeah, and there's my guts too. If I can bring the whole program down to here, between the throat and the belly, I can understand fear in a different way. And that became quite crucial in my own long-term practices, that I can live life from thought, but I can also live life from my heart. So like now, we were lost. We were here on time, honest. You know, we didn't have too much cups of tea. So we're going around, and poor old Debbie has to, and I just kept here. I just kept with my heart. And my thinking mind wanted to go, oh, we're going to be late, we're going to be late. And that was what Debbie had to do. But I just stayed with my heart. And if I stayed with my heart, then it didn't go to thought. Then if there's any kind of movement towards anxiousness, it just dies. It dies in the heart, because I don't proliferate on it. And so that lesson I learned from teaching, from being in front of people, from feeling this very kind of anxious kid now, coming out and feeling fear and so on, and saying, no, that's important, I have to make that conscious. And so I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that opportunity to be afraid. But it was never a fear which was threatening. It wasn't that kind of a fear, it's my own karma. Now, I would have never done that if someone had asked me to do it kind of as a job. I'd never be a lecturer. Because it was so against my character, I would have become some kind of a woodworker somewhere. But because now I had surrendered to a form that I gave up to my teacher, I gave up to the Vinaya, then I had the freedom to watch. And I came back to that theme again. I don't have the freedom to run away unless I disrobe, which I could always do, but I didn't want to. I don't have that freedom, but now I have the freedom to watch. And I never, it was like, but I didn't want to watch this. I didn't sign up for this. But do we ever sign up for this in our lives? I don't think we do. We get something. So those 2 years in Harnham were helpful, and then that same pattern, then Ajahn Sumedho asked me to go to New Zealand. Now all this time, Buddhism was very young in England. But there had been a history of Pali Buddhism from the Pali Text Society, and there was some understanding. And there was some understanding of what monasticism was, because Christian monasticism existed in the north of England. So that there was some kind of cultural connection, although we tended to get called Hare Krishna. And I remember once Ajahn Sumedho was walking through London, and someone came up to him and looked at him really intensely and said, "Budapest." So at least he knew he was a Buddhist. The English can be very funny sometimes. But it wasn't very respectful, let's say. So then when I got to New Zealand, and people, they really didn't know. This guy walking around in a brown bedsheet, what is it? It is too. And people drive by, get a job, or good on you, mate, or something. So New Zealand was interesting because now there were no cultural connections to monasticism. But people were very friendly, very curious, not afraid to ask. And this was a kind of project that was initially supported by a large community of refugees, Lao, Cambodian, Burmese, and then their Thais weren't the refugees, but there were a lot of Thais there, and a lot of Sri Lankans who were professional people. So there's a kind of mix of Asian people, and not that many Westerners. But this group, mixed group, had bought a piece of land, and Ajahn Sumedho once again asked me to go and be that. And that was a kind of full-on project of building a monastery. But the themes by then were pretty much clear in my mind. My character, I understood, the kind of basic thing I had to work with was fear. And then the fear would come up in different kinds of ways. But again, it's okay, that's your karma. That's the pattern that you have to understand. And because the understanding was there, it became a time of building a lot of good kind of character in myself, and my meditation became more silent because the fear was less and less. New Zealand was very beautiful, and I began to gain much more confidence now in what I was doing. So in New Zealand, some of the Kiwis started to pick this up, and I went to a lot of ecumenical meetings, and that was kind of very, very rewarding time. Then I went back to New Zealand, went back to England for 5 years, and that was a really tough time for me. I've had a lot of tough times, but there I got into a lot of responsibilities. Amaravati is a very, very big monastery, and I got overwhelmed with the workload, and I pretty much burnt out. And that was another very difficult experience, because now it wasn't like so much fear, but it was just like taking too much on. My character wasn't really built for that. As opposed to Ajahn Amaro. Ajahn Amaro has a much stronger character for that. And I got really, really burnt out, where I got so exhausted, my meditation became very poor, and my mind really dropped now. It dropped into very negative, kind of depressed states of mind. And I saw something in myself that even though I have the willingness to do this, this is bigger than me. Very humbling, kind of painful experience. This is bigger. You haven't got this. You haven't got the character for this, Viradhammo. And I had to leave feeling quite defeated by it, and quite angry at the community. But I knew I couldn't believe that. So I went off back to New Zealand for a year and did a self-retreat. I have a lot of understanding of people who burn out, because that year was a savior that I could just be with myself. But the mind states I experienced for the first 3 or 4 months were very negative, very, very negative. And I was surprised at how negative they were. But that was the result, that my nervous system just got overwhelmed. It was just too difficult for me. So I have a lot of compassion for people that, take it too far. And I don't say, oh, just push yourself, or, this is a growth experience. It might be a death experience. Be careful. And I could see there's a limit, to our nervous system sometimes, no matter how idealistic you are. So that was difficult in a way which wasn't so edifying. It was edifying in a way, but it wasn't so much liberating. It was more like I got lost in something where I created a lot of karma. I created a lot of negative karma in my own mind because I didn't have the strength. I learned from it. I became more clear about my own limitations. So I kind of got through that year, and again got a bit more smiley, a bit more bright. And then I was in New Zealand, and I got a phone call from my brother, and my mother was living in Ottawa, and she was already 86. She'd fallen and broken her pelvis. And my brother said she was in a home. He couldn't take care of her right away. I just said, fine, I'm there. And 2 days later, I was in Ottawa. And then I saw, well, Mom's too old. And I just moved in with her in her condo. So there's another experience, because I'm not a kind of condo dweller. I'm not a natural, I'm a forest monk, that's the kind of habitat I thought I needed. But I was very close to my mother. I loved her dearly. And I never had a chance to care for her. I never, couldn't buy her birthday presents and take her out to dinner, and certainly I didn't do grandchildren. So I was a good son. I'd come to visit, but I really wasn't a good son in the way that I could care for her. So now I had a chance. And I was pretty free of my responsibilities in New Zealand, so I said, yeah, okay, this will be interesting. So I moved in with her, and then I nursed her through that kind of experience of her pelvis, and she got her walking back, and she kept asking me, when are you going? In a kind of fearful way. I'm not going, I'm staying. When are you going? No, Mom, I'm staying. You sure? Because I'd gone all those other times. So I ended up living with her for 9 years. And that was a beautiful time. It got pretty exhausting at the end. 24/7 caring for an elderly person, even though you love them dearly. The old nerves were on the edge. But this was not the same kind of burnout I got before. And I often contemplate, why was it different? Why was this different to that experience in Amaravati? And I think it was the love. Because now my giving wasn't out of a sense of duty or whatever, but now it was like because I really love my mom. And there's just this capacity to serve from love. And I found amazing amount of energy from that. And I found that the tiredness was no longer a kind of psychological tiredness. It's just, this old guy's tired, that's all. But the compassion and the love and the joy I had to be with her, I found, this is powerful, this is good. So I had 9 years of being able to be with Mom and care for her and get to know her again. And then I just would use that opening of the heart to consciously keep the heart open. And again, I started to, I regained that heart practice again, and I saw not only can the heart and the guts be an indicator of fear, but also, obviously, it's the indicator of love. Deep, deep love. And I began to use that in the way I communicated with my mother. So I would, whenever I would do something for her and she would thank me and make a meal for her or help her with her washing or clean the house or do all the things that one does in caring for someone, and she would thank me with a big smile, and I'd see she was really happy that I was there, and then I was really happy for her. And that happiness for someone else's happiness, we have a word in the Pali we call Mudita. And Mudita is, we call it, kind of the empathy of joy. When you see someone, like if you see a child and the child has made a little drawing, the child is really, really happy with the drawing, and you see the child's happiness, that kind of happiness, that's Mudita. So it had a lot of, although my mom had a lot of physical issues, her mind was bright, her mind was clear, so a lot of Mudita. We had a really nice time together. And so that became a profound sense of being with her, but also it profoundly opened my heart because I kept using that. I kept using that relationship for becoming more and more conscious of the heart. So that teaching, going back to what Luang Por Sumedho said, consciousness is the escape shot. I said consciousness is also the entry point into this deep love and this deep silence. So halfway through those 9 years, I got a bit lonely for monastic life. I was teaching in Ottawa and so on, and I asked the group in Ottawa, I said, is anyone interested in starting a forest monastery? And people were interested, so we got some land nearby and we started the monastery where I'm presently living, Tisarana. And that was 9 years ago. And I would go every weekend, and a fellow monk of mine, Ajahn Kuslo, great monk, he came. He was in New Zealand. He came and helped me. And he ran the monastery for 5 years. For the second half of the time I was with Mom, and I'd go every weekend. And that became my respite. It really helped me tremendously. I could get some rest and go back and be with Mom. And so then my mom died in March 22nd, 2011. And when doctors kept wanting her to go to the hospital. She said, I don't want to go to the hospital. Okay, we have to do it alone. Doctor, go to hospital. No, okay. And she died in about 4 days' time. I was I wasn't a medical guy, so it was pretty confusing. And I only realized what was happening after about 2 days. And I got some friends in. And then she died quite peacefully in her bed. I was with her. And then I had been thinking about this a lot. So when Mom dies, what are you going to do? I said, I'm not going to let the mortician take her away. She's my mom, right? So I told the mortician, wait 36 hours or something. Don't come now. I washed her body. I had a friendly doctor. The doctor came and did the medical certificate. I did some chanting. And then I meditated with Mom's body for the next 36 hours. We can do this in Canada. I don't know if you can do this in California. But I thought, she's my mom. You can't do this. And I thought, this is important. Just to whisk her away after I've been, she's my mom. And not to take this opportunity, not to contemplate death, to me seemed wrong. It just kind of seemed really wrong. So I had prepared my mind for that. So then I was I was working with my brother to organize the funerals on the phone a lot, and people would come and visit. It was March, so it was still cold. I turned off all the heating, so the room was quite cold, and I opened the window, so it was quite cold. And I just would go in, maybe, and just sit with Mom for a couple of hours, and I'd go out again. And it was very powerful. You imagine, huh? Very, very powerful contemplation, very, very peaceful. And then after about 36 hours, okay, that's enough. This is too much. That's enough. I phoned the morticians, and they said, this is not going to be pretty. You better get out of the room. I said, okay. And they took her, and then they took her to the mortuary, and then we had a funeral a few days after that. And then I escorted her body to the crematorium, pushed her body into the ovens, pressed the button, burned her. Then the guy at the crematorium said, so what do you want to do with the ashes? I said, well, can I keep some bones? Because I knew I'd seen that they put the bones into a centrifugal grinder, and that's why it becomes ash. And the guy said, oh yeah, you can pick bones, and we can do a fine or a medium or a coarse grind for you. It was like coffee. I said, oh really? So unexpected. I said, well, I'll take out some bones, and if you did me a medium, that would be fine. So I came back a few days later, and I took the ashes, and then my mother had asked me, we got a bit more time, I'm kind of running on, just to finish, because it's a good story. My mother was a refugee from Latvia, always thinking of Europe. And she asked me before she died, she said, well, can you just take my ashes to the Atlantic and then put them in the Atlantic, maybe they'll float to Latvia. And that was such a poignant thing to say. So I took about a quarter of her ashes, a couple of friends, and we did a kayak trip along the coast of Nova Scotia. And then the second day and we were camping out, the second day of the kayak trip, myself, Adrian, and Ken, Adrian had ashes of her dog. Ken's father had died 2 years before. He had his father's shaving brush. And I had Mom's ashes. So we went out, it was a clear day. We went out from shore, and I chanted the chants of reflection. I poured Mom's ashes in, and Adrian poured the dog's ashes in. And my friend had tied the shaving brush onto some stones and chucked that into the ocean. He was crying. And then we just carried on with down the coast, and it was very, very profound kind of feeling, being out in nature. And there was a group of seals. What do you call a group of seals? A family, a pod? Bunch of seals, maybe 100. And when they saw the 3 boats coming down, they all jumped off the shore, and it seemed like the teenagers started to play around us. They would come up and pop up their heads and float away. And there was one on the shore which didn't come out, and I watched, and I realized it was dead. And it was so powerful, you know. Here's life, here's nature, and all these young, interesting animals, and then there's the dead one. And my mother I just put her ashes in. So that was a very, very powerful experience. Then I took another half of her ashes to Latvia, and I put them in the sea, very close to where, when she fled as a refugee in 1944, near Ventspils. We rented a boat, and I took her out about 1 kilometer and put the ashes, and the rest of the ashes I planted a couple of trees near my window. So I think I did Mom well. So now I live in this monastery in Canada, and now life is very good, practice is very good. I'm very happy to be a monk, and I come and visit Ajahn Pasano here in California once a year. So I think I've gone over my time, so I'll leave that for your reflection. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you. Is there any water about? That'd be nice. Thank you. Anyone have any questions, or you all ready to go home and have dinner, or what?